Well, okay, let's just do it. So far we've concentrated on line, shape, value, and form, right? And we haven't talked about texture too much. Little bit in the last couple of drawings when we did the teddy bear, and even more so when we did the dragon. But on this drawing, I'd like to concentrate on it even more. Okay, so basically, texture just describes the surface, right? So here we have this line, and we have to really think about, well, what is this? If we just look at the lines and the shapes, and even if we had shadows, we could have forms. But what is it? So you have to ask, is it is it something smooth like tile, maybe with a highlight and some reflective quality, as well as just a little bit of volume, right? Is it something like that? Or is it something like maybe this is shingles, right? Wooden shingles. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe this is heavy stone, right? Maybe these are heavy stone blocks. See, any of these might have had the same sort of lines to them, the same sort of structure to them, right? But but they're very different things, right? Just depending on the texture that you had made them be, right? Okay, enough of that. So, anywho, so texture, right? Texture in the last thing that we drew was very smooth, very plasticky. You could almost say like almost no texture at all, right? Very little going on with that. But we could have something on the other hand that's very smooth and, well, very, very shiny. And then that's a texture in itself, showing all those reflections. We could have something that was pretty shiny and had some pattern to it, like this wood right here. Okay. You could have something that was, on the other hand, very rough, like super rough, like this tree bark right here, or this brush right here. We have carpeting, we've got rough cloth, all these different things, and just a million other textures out there. And so in this drawing, I want you to pick two. I've got a whole box full of like different things that have a lot of texture, but you could find textures around the classroom. You could find textures in your house. I wouldn't do smooth textures, no smooth and shiny things for right now, because we're going to go over that in depth here in just a little bit, maybe in the next drawing or two. For right now, I want you to pick something that's really rough. And I think I'm going to go two things. You got to pick two things. I'm going to go with a little bit of tree bark, right? And I'm going to go with this old brush. And I picked these things for a reason. One, because they seemed challenging, and as a teacher, I don't want to shy away from things that are challenging. And two is that they've got a couple of really good lessons in them. So let's start with a tree bark. I'm just going to go ahead and divide my paper in half, just like that. And in here, I'm really just looking for the texture, not the form. So I might go ahead and just sort of give an indication of the edge that's right there, right? And then start looking. And I don't have to get this pattern exact, although I will get my inspiration from it. And I'll see, oh, look, there's all these different little sections that it seems to be broken into. That's what I want to get. And, something like this, oh boy, you could just spend hours on something like this here. And, honestly, doing texture might be one of the things that takes you the longest uh, times in your drawing. Structures can go pretty quick. Details even could go pretty quick. But the texture, that could take a while. And you can see I'm not following that exact. I'm just getting sort of like the larger aspects of it, just getting a sense of how it is going. Okay. And so then we see that we've got these different spots here, and each one has a form to it. So each one of these has sort of a shadow to it, depending on how the light is going. So I might emphasize that a little bit. Get these sort of main ones out. And you'll see that what this is almost like a fractal in that it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and yet stays the same like all the time, right? As smaller as it gets, it's just the same version of itself. So I'm really emphasizing some of the shadow on some of these main structures of the bark. That's how I might handle this. Okay, and so as it breaks down, I'm going to say, okay, these are then broken into smaller parts, but I won't make the shadow part quite as dark on that. Maybe a little bit. Remember, one of the very first things that we were doing was lines that were dark, medium, and light, were we not? Make a bigger piece right here. Dark, medium, and light lines. So now I'm going more for medium. I had some dark lines, now for medium. See, I think I'll re-emphasize some of these larger shapes so that they don't get lost, because it seems to me we have a series of larger and smaller shapes that are pretty much the same as far as kind of what they look like. Like I said, a fractal. Bigger and smaller versions of the same thing. Just get a little bit over here. Why not? All right, and one more time. My pattern is not at all following the pattern that's on here as far as getting every little clump, every little thing in the right place. No, that's not important. Remember, we're dealing with texture. And texture often gets into one of the principles of art, which is pattern, or another one, which is repetition. And in this series, we're not really talking about the principles of art. We've only talked about the elements of art. But you can see it's starting to get there, isn't it? Little by little, as I add that in, I want to have some emphasis on my darker areas. Okay. But as it's breaking down into all those smaller areas, maybe even lighter and lighter lines to show the differences in depth. And that's giving me some sense of the texture. Now, texture is no replacement for the shading, the values that you get from creating a form, and it's also no replacement for the values that you might get from color, right? So if this was, let's say, round, so I'm gonna round this up a little bit as if this was an even more curved surface, and I'm gonna say that my light source is coming from this side over here, even though I've got these shadows more in depth over here. Okay, let's put the shadow over here, since I do. Why not? I don't know as I'm following the light exactly. That's okay. Okay, and so then, if I was to make this a rounder form, this would still have to be shaded, right? Shaded for form, and as I come around, I might emphasize the three-dimensionality of some of these more than others, so I'm not making that shading absolutely just blank the whole way around, but actually giving it some sense of depth. And I also might shade it for color. This is, this is not a white object here. So the whole thing might have a little bit more shading to it. as far as the color goes. I can't wait for the people that are in art class. When we get in more into painting, I love painting. Honestly, I think I like paint more than pencils because you can just do so much more. Well, because for one thing, you get color. Now, you can have colored pencils, obviously, but paint, I like what you can do with a brush. And speaking of brushes, the brush has another wonderful thing to show us. So whereas we have these obvious little structures on top of little structures on top of little structures, right? Little forms on top of little forms, maybe I should say. Here, to make up this, on the brush, what we have is clumping. So a lot of people might do hair or bristles or any manner of things like that for just like this, da, 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 just a bunch of straight lines, right? But that's not really how it is. It's very rare that you'll get things that are truly separate like that. Mostly what happens is that things clump. Kind of like everything in this universe clumps. Even clusters of galaxies clump. So I'm not going to really concentrate on the ferrule and the handle so much as on the bristles here, because that's what I'm really interested in. And I'm interested in all this clumping that's going on in here. Okay. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and start my drawing, making a basic sort of shape. Now I know kids, they'll just sit here and they'll just, you know, trace around the brush. I don't want you to do that. And so to know that you didn't do that, I want the if you do a brush, for instance, an old brush, I want it to be ridiculously larger than what the actual brush is, so that I know that you didn't just, trace a brush. It'll be obvious to me, to you, to everybody. Okay, so with this brush, I am following the form a little bit. And so, it's a good example or a good time to show you, how you can use measurements a little bit. So I say, okay, well, here's the ferrule of the brush right here, right? That's how big that is. How big is it relative to the bristles of the brush? Well, it's not half, right? It's not the same size as those. The bristles are a little bit longer. So if I look at my initial drawing here, I can see like, oh, well, here I've got my bristles a lot longer. All right, so I think I'll make that ferrule a little bit taller. The other thing is I can see like, well, with this, how wide is it versus how tall is it? Okay, and so from here, here's the width and here's the height. It's about a quarter taller than it is wide. So here's the width, here's the height. Is that about a quarter taller? Yeah, that's not too bad. Good enough for us for this. Okay, so I've got the overall size of my brush broken down into shapes. Like I say, I'm not going to be concentrating on the ferrule, really. I really want to just concentrate on these bristles. Although if you were doing this on your own and not making a tutorial, had a little bit more time maybe, you could concentrate more on the rest of the brush as well. But here, the important thing is to look how these are broken into clumps. So I've got sort of a clump here, and since this doesn't have a million things, right, it's just got a few things, I might be a little bit more accurate in following what I see here. Here's another clump right here. Here's another, right? And if it's not perfect, that's okay. It's a texture. We're creating a pattern, aren't we? There's another clump. Here seems like another sort of a clumpy structure right here. Okay. And as I look, I've got areas that are behind. I'll indicate those with a little bit darker value. Okay. Drew lightly so I could get rid of some of the initial horizontal lines that I don't want in there. And so then, looking at it, okay, so start constructing those clumps a little bit more. I do have some darks going in here because each clump is a little form. Okay. Alrighty, and then I see it's a little bit darker at the base right here. So I'm going to represent that a little bit. And as I make my lines, I'm reinforcing the idea, once again, that these bristles are not totally uniform, that they have clumped together in some spots more than others. Just drawing what you see, that's the important thing. Okay, so if I've got this area here, okay, now in the middle I've got some other areas, stronger values. We got a real straight hair right here. Let's get that a little bit. And let's see. So what else? What else? Little, I think I'll just reinforce some of these areas a little bit just to bring out the clumpiness of it. Once again, I've got this little darker area, maybe a few stray hairs here and there. And I think a little bit at the top, need to reinforce that idea of clumpiness. And just to neaten it up, I think I'll give it a little bit of value here, maybe a little bit more structure on the ferrule, but once again, I'm not really concentrating on that. Although there's one lesson I'll show you real quick on the ferrule, is that you've got this pattern here. So if you were doing, let's say, a sketchbook drawing and you were doing the whole brush, you see this whole ridge of little diagonal features. And so you say like, well, how do I do that? It's easy. You count. Okay, so if there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I don't know, let's say 20 of them, then count. Okay, I got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 of these individual little shapes, and each one, could become its own little form, right? As you make that, that the little ridges that it have, those are little forms as well. Up here you've got this little bit. Okay. So forth and so on. Like I say, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. You could, as part of your drawing, why not? And try and match the textures a little bit better. But anyways, I tried to pick a couple of them that, might seem a little bit more daunting, but also that have some really good lessons. One is that here you've got almost this fractal-like bunch of forms, forms within forms, and you just want to emphasize some more than others. You want to shade for color, for the form, for the shading and the shadow, as well as for all the little structures in there, right? And in the brush, you just want to look for all the clumping, and maybe if you've got a series of things, to count them. Well, that's about it. So like I say, 2 things, and we'll call this, what's this? Drawing 13. And it is texture. And here, why don't you put this too? Texture describes the surface of things. There. So, very important, once again, to write things down, clarify it. Texture describes the surface of things. And this is exercise 13. Oops, forgot to put my name on it, didn't I? Here, let's try that again. So who am I? I am Kuhn Robert, and this is exercise 13. Okay, well, good luck with everything.